Hello and welcome to the Gus Codes. I am Gus, and in this session of xganso I'll present and discuss the MVP roadmap for the first playable version of the game, composed of the intro, flock and mission selection, battle and results. Development has reached a stage where key game design decisions need to be made. Instead of getting stuck searching for the perfect choices and risking a slowdown, I decided to define a clear roadmap for the first playable version. Once the MVP is complete, we'll have a version we can actually play, test, and use to tune game design parameters. Let's start planning. The roadmap has one file milestone, supported by several stepping stones along the way. The overall goal is to create a complete playable game loop from the intro to the end of a battle. This will require implementing all the core mechanics and considering key concepts like the game manager and overall workflow. The next step was to define which features truly need to be implemented. As developers, we often want to include everything, but it's important to recognize our limits in time and manpower. With this in mind, I decided to focus on the following features. First, the units. Originally there were 5 main leaders planned, but for now I'll implement 3, the archer, knight and mage. This gives a good balance of offense and defense and melee versus range combats. Alongside the units, I'll define their stats, the flock structure and the data flow across the game. Next, the commit and resolve turns. The key aspects are the planning and execution phases, unit actions, currently move and attack, and user input. This mechanic forms the foundation of all battles. To complete the turns, I'll need to handle combat. The first step is to define the combat formula, which can always be adjusted later. Then I'll implement the combat service, responsible for calculating damage and connect it to both the combat preview and combat resolution. At this stage, there won't be a progression mechanic beyond showing a victory or defeat screen after battle. This decision helps simplify development by focusing only on what's essential right now. The result will be similar to those old demo builds you can play through limited scenarios, but with a small mission generator to create random battles. The last coding feature is the enemies. For now there will be 2, the grunt and the cannon. They provide a basic mix of melee and ranged behavior along with different strategies. More enemies types will be added gradually later. For the creative side, I'll have artwork for the map, units and UI. However, these will mostly serve as placeholders rather than final assets. The goal is to make them functional and readable, not polished yet. As for sound, I plan to add basic sound effects and experiment with creating an original soundtrack for the game. Once the features were defined, the next step was to organize the work into implementation tasks. Let's take a quick look at them. The plan is to implement each unit individually, including their stats, passives and artwork. Some coordination will be needed to ensure balanced stats. After all units are complete, I can move on to developing the flock structure and data management. The turn mechanic is divided into 2 phases, planning and execution. In the planning phase, I'll handle all user inputs required to plan a turn, selecting units, moving, attacking, cancelling actions, planning the enemy turn and ending the turn. For each of these I'll need to implement the core logic, supporting data structures and corresponding UI elements. In the execution phase, I'll display the turn order and the current execution status. Each action, such as movement or attack, will include its functional logic and clear feedback through logs, visuals or sound effects. The combat mechanic is fairly straightforward. First, I'll implement the combat service responsible for calculating damage. Then, I'll build the combat preview and resolution systems, along with the necessary logic and the framework for visual and audio feedback during actions. The progression mechanism will be kept simple. I just need to detect when the battle ends, currently by defeating all enemies. At the end of the battle, the results screen will show victory or defeat, along with an option to restart the game. For the map and missions, I'll refactor the map transitioning from the current implementation to ECS. This will require updating data structures, algorithms, rendering, and user input handling. Mission templates will also be defined to serve as input for generating map and spawning enemies. The enemies are similar to the player units. They have stats, artwork, and an additional behavior component that defines how they act in the game. Finally, I implement game control, including all necessary screens, as well as the game manager and screen manager. I created a GitHub project and issues for each of the map tasks and defined their dependencies. Based on their current structure, there are 11 issues ready to start, 5 for the units and enemies, 1 for the combat service, 1 for refactoring the map data structures, 1 for map templates, 1 for turn actions, 1 for the game manager, and 1 for the entry screen. There are plenty of entry points, and as I complete tasks, new one will become available. One important note about the development, it has been lacking documentation and testing, so during this implementation phase, I'll make sure each issue includes both documentation for the ongoing topic and proper testing alongside the code. These aspects were previously secondary, but this time they'll be integrated from the start. To summarize, today we went through the MVP roadmap. We reviewed the features that will be implemented and how they are organized into GitHub issues. Based on the roadmap, we start with the implementation of the units, both leaders and enemies. Along the way, we'll also define their stats and begin shaping how combat will look and feel. Thank you for your time, and see you in the next session.